Hello everyone and welcome back to Destiny. It's no secret that there is a current lack of content for veteran Destiny players. The difference between now and this time last year is that we have some kind of idea of what we can expect content-wise for Year 3. I went over the news in a bit more detail in my previous video, but in summary, Year 3 has much more content coming very soon. It's not very specific about what that content is, but it's more information than we had this time last year. This, combined with our sincerest beliefs that Bungie has learned from their past oversights, has left an air of positivity for this final year of Destiny 1. And with such, I've noticed many beginning to look back at where it all started. Many veteran players, myself included, look back at Year 1 with fond memories, because despite the lack of content, and through thick and thin, it's what brought us all together as a community. However, there are still a few things that I believe were actually superior in Year 1, at least when compared to their Year 2 or Year 3 counterparts. So let's journey back to a perhaps more innocent time and take a look at 5 things I miss from Destiny Year 1. First, a little context for those who might be newer to Destiny. The game was released back in September 9th of 2014 with a season pass for 2 expansions. The game's first expansion, The Dark Below, was released 3 months after launch on December 9th. That expansion introduced us to Eris Morn and gave us the game's second raid, Crota's End. We got a second expansion about 5 months after that, on May 19th, titled House of Wolves. That expansion introduced us to the Vestian Outpost and expanded the story of Queen Mara Sov and her brother Prince Uldren. Petra Venge's character was reimagined and became the primary quest giver for the story. We were also introduced to Varix the Loyal and the Prison of Elders as the expansion's endgame activity in lieu of a raid. Then the Taken King was announced 1 month later at E3 and was slated for a September 15th, 2015 launch. Presented as a major expansion, it promised to overhaul many of the game's systems. With Bungie about to begin a new and vastly improved year of Destiny, everything up until that point was affectionately grouped into the title of Year 1. The Taken King and the April update were the content releases that comprised Year 2, and of course Year 3 began with Rise of Iron and will continue until the rumored release of Destiny 2 this fall. Now, contrary to the community's constant cry for more content in the game, we've had a pretty eventful 2 years and 4 months in the world of Destiny. The game has changed vastly from vanilla, but not all change is good. There have been plenty of changes that might have seemed like a great idea and concept, but ended up causing many players to look back on the glory days of Year 1 with the fondness and nostalgia that perhaps your grandparents feel about the 1950s. So let's jump into discussing some of those things that we miss. I feel like the first thing on this list absolutely has to be the loot cave. If there was ever something that developers could never imagine a player base exploiting, it was the loot cave. The whole thing started because of how Bungie dealt with spawning enemies in Patrol. You may have noticed several places around Destiny's Patrol destinations that feature empty rooms or caves. These are known as spawn doors. It's a clever way for the game to spawn a new batch of enemies into an area without having them just appear out of thin air. Except for, of course, the Vex. And the Taken. But those are explained. Sort of. Anyways, the spawn doors only spawn more enemies when you were far enough away from the cave. In the Cosmodrome in particular, there's a spot in Skywatch where you could actually aim down the cave entrance and kill Hive before they got a chance to leave the cave. Also, the spawn timer was set to only 6 seconds. This meant that new enemies would continue to spawn from the cave every 6 seconds as long as players were far enough away. And of course, this naturally led to players standing far away and firing endlessly into a dark cave. This proved to be the most efficient way to farm engrams off of an infinite spawn of enemies. When you ran out of ammo, you would venture into the cave, grab ammo and loot, and then start again. While this didn't lead to any worthwhile gear, it was a great source for materials. Plus, you got the occasional legendary engram now and again, which most likely decrypted into a rare anyways, but that's a whole different story. As silly and pointless as the loot cave was in the grand scheme of things, it was one of the first things that brought the Destiny community together online. In fact, it was difficult to run into a Destiny player that didn't know about the loot cave. It also became a great way to just kick back after a nightfall and raid and just talk to your buddies. Eventually, Bungie shut down the loot cave by drastically increasing the respawn timer of the enemies, and in its place, a memorial.
A million deaths are not enough for Master Raoul.
And speaking of loot, we have number 2, which is exotics. Of course, exotics do still exist in the game, but let me explain. Undoubtedly, one of the best parts of Destiny is its concept of exotic gear. I mean, if one of your exotics becomes #1 trending on Twitter simply because it's finally available for sale, you might be doing something right. But then we got an item known as 3 of Coins with the Taken King. And without going into a rant about how 3 of Coins are diminishing what makes exotics so special, we can look back at year 1 and remember how exotics were granted back then. And there was a very limited number of ways to get exotic gear back then. There were possibly, and frankly much more likely, a reward for completing the Nightfall. Then there was a chance of getting one in the exotic raid chest in Vault of Glass, that is, if you were raiding at all. And then there was a very small chance of getting one during the Crucible post-game reward screen. And then of course there was Xur every weekend. But that was it. Not many places at all, which is what made attaining exotics so much more special in year 1. And also it's what made Xur so special in the first place. There was a good chance you didn't have something he had for sale, unless of course you were a warlock. I still feel really sorry for those guys. But essentially because of this and because Fourth Horseman was exclusive to PlayStation, I still don't have my year 1 Fourth Horseman. I managed to get a year 2 Fourth Horseman, but I'm still missing my year 1, which right now I know the only way I can get it is with Legacy Special Engrams, which honestly is probably the only thing I have to really go for nowadays. But yeah, exotics felt super rare and precious, and we sort of lost that feeling now with 3 of Coins and the exotic blueprint kiosk. Exotics are no longer the treasures that they once were. Number 3 is secret areas. With Bungie so tight-lipped about the future of the game's content in year 1, the community had no choice but to hunt for any clues they could get their hands on that might shed some light about the future of the game. 2 major areas that became the topic of controversy were the Jovian Complex and King's Watch in the Cosmodrome. The Jovian Complex is the area that your ghost unlocks during the Will of Crota strike. Well, before that strike came out and before the Dark Below, we couldn't access this area, at least not without glitching into it. In fact, my first video ever was covering how to glitch into the Jovian Complex, which is the footage you're seeing before you. I posted this video about a month before the Dark Below was released, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. Just be warned that it's my first ever edited Destiny video, so it's definitely quite rough around the edges. Anyways, the other area you could glitch into was King's Watch. As you can see here, this area is actually closed off during patrol, and it actually didn't become accessible until story missions inside House of Wolves. But of course, many did manage to glitch into this area, and this led many to accuse Bungie of cutting content from the game with the explicit purpose of saving it for the expansions to simply make more money. Many accuse this to be Activision's idea to get an easy cash grab. Of course, we've since learned that this was not the case. Bungie had to remake the entire campaign of the game from scratch less than a year before it came out, and simply didn't have time to finish everything. We also learned that there is a huge difference between simply designing a playable space and designing a story mission with dialogue and special enemy encounters. Anyways, exploring these secret areas was one of the most interesting parts of year 1. Number 4 is public events. For the most part, public events of year 1 were the same as you know them now. Vex sacrifices, warsats, VIPs, nothing too exciting. However, with the Dark Below and later the House of Wolves, Bungie managed to capture our curiosity and successfully livened up the patrol destinations with a new kind of public event. First, in the Dark Below, random Hive rituals started to appear in dark corners of the Cosmodrome. These rituals would feature some acolytes and a sword-bearing knight. Upon killing this knight, they would drop their sword and you could use it for a limited amount of time. Keeping in mind at this point that there were no swords that you could equip, and the only time you got to use a blade was at the end of the Blade of Crota story mission. There wasn't much you could do with it other than kill continually spawning Hive, and if you were lucky it would coincide with a Warsat event, But of course, we soon learned that it was just given to us as an opportunity to play with the blade in preparation of the final encounter of Crota's End. Now, my favorite public event was introduced with the House of Wolves. Every 20 minutes or so, a fallen skiff would show up and drop off a few waves of fallen wolves. Patrol destinations, especially in the Cosmodrome, are typically filled with low-level enemies, so it was very exciting to finally fight enemies that were at a much higher level, and were actually a challenge. Plus, this was the first time we encountered a Scorch Captain that would drop their cannon for us to use. But what made these public events special was that they were paired with wanted bounties from Petra Venj. Also, upon defeating the wanted fallen leader, you were presented with a hunt for an ether chest. Inside the chest was a chance to get a treasure key, which at the time was the only way to open the treasure chest at the end of Prison of Elders. Of course, that chest granted you Queen's Wrath gear and possibly even exotics. It was a very inventive way of farming for gear, which I don't believe has been matched ever since. I truly hope to see more things like that in Destiny 2. And finally, number 5, we have farming. Nothing makes an online MMO style game without having to farm some kind of material. Farming iron ore was at the core of some of my fondest memories in playing World of Warcraft, because you did it while you were watching Netflix or chatting with friends. The same went with farming materials in Destiny. Before you could buy or even extract planetary materials, you actually had to walk up to them in Patrol and hold square to acquire them. I know, it's bizarre. And since you needed planetary materials to upgrade your gear, you had to go out on Patrol and farm them. Aside from the random spawns, you could also get them from random chests. All those chests could also give you Glimmer, rare engrams, and sometimes even ship schematics. Once you opened a chest, another would respawn somewhere else in that area, assuming you were far enough away from it. So this naturally led to people forming farming routes. You would essentially run a huge lap around a given area, hitting every room or cave looking for a chest. My favorite route was the one in the Scablands on Mars. The rooms were the easiest to identify, and relic iron is one of the easiest materials to visually pick out simply because of how barren Mars is. So I would do these laps for hours, farming up dozens of relic iron and a few thousand glimmer, and maybe partake in a few public events, all while rewatching the entire series of Scrubs on Netflix for the 10th time. All in all, not a bad way to spend a Sunday afternoon. The cool thing about farming routes is that you can still run them to this day, or you can just go to Variks every week, or buy them with marks like an adult with better things to do. But as much as I might complain about it, what I missed from that was the grind. One of my favorite Twitch streamers said it best: I like my looter shooters extra grindy, and I couldn't agree more. There is simply a certain satisfaction you get from grinding out gear or even a certain material that I miss from the base game. You are showered with loot nowadays, which feels great in the moment, but there are fewer moments of true achievement because of it. Anyways, those are just a few things that I miss from year 1. Of course, I admit that ultimately right now in year 3, the game is at its best that it's ever been, but of course I can't help but look back at the good old days. What do you miss from the Destiny glory days? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe for more Destiny content. And I will see you all next time. This week at Bungie had been on a short holiday break, but now it's back for its first post in 2017. And while there are no major announcements this week, Deej talks about plenty of things that we have to look forward to, and reassures us that while the dawning might be over, there is still plenty to look forward to in the world of Destiny.